Hi, my name is Bill Brewster. I'm a music writer and DJ, and this is Matthew Collin.
Hello.
Whose book we're celebrating tonight, Rave on. I first met Matthew on the dance floor at the Roxy in New York 24 years ago. And
are you sure it wasn't at Bagley's a little earlier than that?
No, you could be right.
Zilderberg.
Yes, you could, yes.
That's why you wouldn't remember.
Yes. Yeah, I've expunged that from my memory. Okay, we've known each other for about 25 years, but since Matthew has moved to the far side of the world, we don't see each other very often anymore. But if you know anything about him, you'll know that he's written a number of books, all of them brilliant. And in the late 80s, when he was working at ID, he was one of the people that was documenting the explosion in house music and acid house in London on a weekly basis, along with his colleague John Godfrey. And he was also the first person to write about it seriously in book form when he wrote Altered State in 96?
97.
It came out in 97, but you wrote it before then, yeah? Okay. In fact, my partner Frank, I think, replaced him while he was writing it.
Yes. Exactly right.
That's right.
And actually, the second edition, and you DJ'd at the launch party for the first edition.
That's right. Yeah.
And the second edition launch was at a low life party of yours and Frank's. So.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. It was in an old bank vault in Clerkenwell.
Right.
Yeah, it was.
That's where I was.
I'm pretty sure it was. Anyway, this is very incestuous because we've known each other for a long time. But what I wanted to say is that Altered States was the first book to seriously write about dance music, to take dance music seriously, to take electronic music seriously. And I want to ask him about that in a minute because I remember him saying when he was trying to get a deal that every time he approached the publisher, they suggested that he wrote about grunge instead. But Altered State was the thing that gave myself and Frank confidence that we might be able to write a book about dance music and document the scene that we'd all been involved in for the previous 10 years. And he was the trailblazer, really. So I'd like to welcome Matthew back in the UK for a brief tour. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Matthew Collin.
Too kind, Don. I'm quite embarrassed.
So I want to ask you about Altered State and the gestation of it, because when you think about it now, and it's 30 years ago since house music and acid house and you wrote it quite early on, really. I mean, it wasn't that many years since the kind of first flowering of electronic music in the UK. Certainly not. I mean, obviously it had been around before that, but the kind of house era.
Me and John Godfrey had this idea like about 5 years before that, but we got in, as you said, incredibly disillusioned by the fact that we kept getting told that this is something ephemeral. There's going to be no appetite for reading about it in that kind of way. At that point, it was a very young culture, and I don't think. Well, there's no conception that it could be something like it is today, something with an incredible weight of cultural history behind it, and seen as an important movement in British. Cultural history, British contemporary cultural history. So it was, that you had your acid house, and then there'll be something else. The grunge is the thing now, and that's what young people like. I mean, of course, all this sounds ridiculous today because now every kind of music is perpetually alive on YouTube. Nothing ever dies anymore. So I don't know. People always say that your first book, if it's non-fiction, is in fact a submerged autobiography, and that certainly was. It was, and I guess, an attempt to make sense and meaning of what you lived through and what you thought was important, and therefore, and the people around you thought was important, and that was really all it was. Even at that stage, the final chapter of that book is all about the whole culture becoming a much more of a mainstream leisure pursuit, a kind of high street entertainment format. I mean, compared to today, it was absolutely tiny. It was nothing. You know, it was. I looked at it again, and one of the estimates by some market research organisation was this is worth £1.8 million a year, and now the estimate being bandied about is £5.5 billion a year. You know, the difference is absolutely massive. But yeah, I mean, it was just want to document something that was really meaningful to us at the time, and try and make sense of it in terms of where did it fit into to the rest of society? Where did it come from? What was the point of it? What did it all mean? Don't think I answered the last one at all, but, because everyone's got their own meaning in the end. But yeah, so that was that.
You've always had an international perspective. I mean, obviously, Altered State was largely about the UK, but your next book and your friendships with people in Serbia, which is what I guess inspired the book. Can you tell me a little bit about first going over to Serbia? Because I suppose when you started going over there, they were having something similar to what we'd had in 87, 88.
That's exactly right, and that's where this was a kind of direct connection on shared interests, which was house and techno music. Because I got commissioned to write about student protest movement. This was in the Milosevic era, and it was a student protest movement against falsified elections. So where did I get a contact? Through one of the dance music magazines at the time, Music, which no longer exists. Some DJs had just been out to play in Belgrade, and they left they published an email address of one of these people, and this person was turned out to be one of the DJs at the pioneering club in Belgrade, and okay, we had this whole connection through the politics of what was going on at the time, and resistance to that regime in former Yugoslavia. But there was the basis of it was a shared interest in music and clubs, and that for me was also quite inspiring, seeing how club culture could help to nurture movements for social change as well. I mean, there's never been a defined ideology of house music or the house movement or whatever. It's always been however people want to define it for themselves. So it can be defined in a spectrum ranging from pure hedonism, weekend lunacy, Saturday Night Fever on one hand, to the people who believe it's a kind of radical movement for social change. But the fact that in a completely different country this music was being used as part of this kind of movement for social change was really interesting to me, and that's how that connection came about. And that person I met is still best friends today. So
can you explain a little bit about the role of B92? Because it was kind of like, I suppose it was very similar to the role that Kiss played in London, but because it was so much more politically charged in what was a country falling apart, it must have played a more dynamic and political role.
I think in a lot of the a few of the former Yugoslav republics, there were these radio stations that came out of student movements in Ljubljana, in Zagreb, Radio 101, in Belgrade, Radio B92. These were kind of that acted as progressive forces within the country, and it wasn't. Music was seen as part of this progressive political outlook forward-thinking music, forward-thinking ideas, forward-thinking politics. It was the same people who were embracing all of these things at the same time. So they were intimately bound up with each other. It wasn't seen as, okay, you've got your techno over there, and then I might have these political views over here. No, they were all the kind of progressive outlook was all part of the same thing.
Okay, so we'll move on to Rave On now, which I suppose in some ways is a continuation of This Is Serbia, Collin, because it's you kind of travelling around the world making sense of where electronic music is now. So what was the initial inspiration for that?
The initial inspiration was that Hannah, Hannah's somewhere there. Hannah, my publisher, asked me if I wanted to write a book about how this whole electronic dance music culture, since Altered State in 20 years ago, has become an international phenomenon, has become completely globalised. And immediately I thought, there's no way I'm ever going to do that. That is the most impossible, scary idea. I didn't tell you this, I don't think. No. But this is completely and utterly impractical. There's too much. You know, it literally, this culture literally is pretty much everywhere, you know, excluding certain more hardline states. And its variations, its musical variations, you can find everywhere. You know, you can go to a dubstep club in Buenos Aires. You can go and dance the footwork in Belgrade. You can go to a psytrance rave somewhere in the wilds of China. This is all possible. How can that possibly all be documented? It can't. It would be a massive list. It'd be unreadable, and it would be immediately out of date. So I thought, my immediate reaction was to say absolutely no chance. But I was.
But they offered you money to all expenses paid. The temptation was overwhelming.
It was the offer of the gig with you, Bill, that swung it. Yeah, I mean, I was eventually talked into it by some mutual friends who said that it doesn't have to be like an encyclopedia of everything that's going on around the world, because it is absolutely impossible logistically and in any way, and it would also of course be incredibly boring. But to look at how things develop differently in different places according to the social environment, contemporary history, economy, all these things affect how cultures develop. And that was where I thought, okay, I can see a way that this could actually be something that not only that I would be interested in doing, but would also possibly even be readable. So that was really how it happened.
So there were huge variations in experiences there, because you've got absolutely. On the one hand the bottle service clubs in Las Vegas where DJs are earning $400,000 a night, and then you've got underground DJs in Dubai, I think it was, where some of the guys organising parties had come from Iran, yes. I mean, that really kind of shows the contrast of what electronic music is around the world. You talk a bit about that guy who fascinated me the most probably is the guys from Iran that are throwing underground parties in quite a repressed state, really.
Yeah, I mean, they kept saying to me, "Well, come to Iran and we'll show you everything." You know, an English journalist is not going to get a visa to go to Iran. This is just not going to happen. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to take up that offer. But this actually goes to one of what I think are the kind of key points about this, is that these kind of nodes of the culture in different places often start with these real kind of obsessives, idealists, dreamers, the believers, basically. And what they want to do is they want to create. They fall in love with this music, and they want to create a community of like minds with which to enjoy it. You know, they want to create a small society. And as the example of the Iranian guy who got sentenced to a lashing for organising parties in Tehran, even though these were private parties, this was not in a club. This is they often organised them in chalets outside the city, in like chalet resorts. Sounds a bit Butlins in an Iranian way, but anyway, the fact that he was completely. He was completely straight about it. You know, if I'm going to do this, this is the risk I'm running, and I've decided that I want to do this, so I'm prepared to face this risk. In the end, he left Iran because it wasn't. He wanted to take it a little bit further. He wanted a career as a DJ and a promoter, and obviously that wasn't going to be possible in Iran. But whilst in Iran, he was willing to take the consequences of his actions. And to do that just for some music, I think that's absolutely incredible. But on the other hand, then you've got, if you go to this other extreme of, you were talking about these glitzy, brash, Las Vegas clubs, which are essentially just money machines. I mean,
but that does have its roots in a kind of idealism as well, doesn't it? I mean, some
Las
of the
Vegas.
Donny, well, not Las Vegas, but I mean Donny Disco, and is it Pasquale something?
Yeah, Rotella, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I know he's really loaded and successful, but I mean, he did start throwing quite small parties to start with.
He's the guy who runs Electric Daisy Carnival, which is one of the 3 or 4 really biggest American. Well, they don't call them raves anymore. After to convince the authorities there is no kind of drug taking there whatsoever, they call them festivals rather than raves these days. Raves is since the 2002 Rave Act legislation, which was Joe Biden's work, I think. They started referring to them as festivals instead. But yeah, I mean, those guys came out of the American rave scene, but the things that are the actual nightclub situation in Las Vegas is purely a money-making thing. It's not even anything to do with these guys who were young ravers and then became big-scale entrepreneurs. It's people who've come after that, and money is all it's about.
I mean, the night you describe is very stratified, isn't it? There's the kind of the proletarians in the.
This is when you've flown to some place for a week, and you know you need to collect material because you can't afford to come back again, and frankly, sometimes you never want to come back again, ever. So. I was trying to get this interview with this Steve Aoki. I don't know if people know who Steve Aoki is.
He's a cake throwing twat who plays terrible techno.
Well, he's the son of a millionaire restaurant entrepreneur, and
well, he's that as well.
And before he became Steve Aoki, he used to DJ as Kid Millionaire. Presumably a tribute to his father, or maybe he was asking for his pocket money. I've got no clue. Anyway, so I was trying to get an interview with this guy, and he was. They were just extremely long. He even gave an interview to a TV show about dogs because he's got some dogs, but he wouldn't give me an interview at all. And it was getting more and more annoying. And in the end, they said, "Well, he'll do it tonight," and then they said, "You won't do it tonight, but you can have a free ticket to get in." And I thought, this is not going very well. But it was one of those nights where it was just symbolic of what it was all about. The whole kind of Vegas idea of electronic dance music and how far away it had got from acid house, rave and all that. So the setup was, there was a stage, next to the stage there were these kind of lodges, I suppose you'd call them, the private lodges, like in the opera. So they were kind of bubbling out from the wall by the stage. Then you had private booths, with bottle service booths. They were for the kind of, they weren't as rich as the people in the lodges. And then you had a rope. The people in the booths had access to a small dance floor. Then you had a rope, and then there was a kind of holding pen for all the other people who hadn't paid as much to get in or hadn't got the right wristband or whatever it was. And they weren't allowed to go any further than this rope. So it was completely class stratified into these three separate social classes, depending on how much they paid to get in, how close they could get to the action. And what he was doing was, it was interesting because he wasn't DJing in a way that you would recognise DJing. I mean, there was music playing, and he did occasionally do this this EDM thing, like that. I bet you do that now, don't you?
All the time. From my open-lidded coffin.
You want to watch that leg with that? And so there's music playing. He's got a little plinth. He jumps up and dances on it, and he invites the ladies from these lodges to come and dance with him. The music is playing next to him. He's not taking any notice of this music playing. He's just dancing on this plinth.
He's too busy baking cakes, I imagine.
And then there's a couple of RoboCop style robots come up through the audience, hand him a couple of pistols, and he fires out dry ice like this. And then goes back behind his deck thing for a little bit, but then comes out and then does some more dancing and does a call and response. Stops the music for a call and response. I mean, this is completely and utterly a different thing in terms of the way it's organised as a social event with its stratification. I mean, I know we've always had VIP areas, but this is taking it to quite a lot further on than that. And the way he's actually performing, he's not actually DJing, he's performing. It's like a kind of hoofer, really, a vaudeville hoofer. And it's all made.
Do you think Sammy Davis Jr. would approve?
I think it's in that tradition. It's in the tradition of a Vegas show. So this was all very interesting. And after the disappointment of not getting an interview with this intelligent gentleman, this was like absolute journalistic gold. I couldn't believe. And they'd actually invited me to come along to write about it. I mean, how... what would they think? How would they think of it? Beggars belief, frankly. But Vegas is a long, long way from what you or I or a lot of people, certainly in Europe, would recognise as dance music culture.
What was the? I mean, maybe that was the worst experience of the book. What was the most inspiring?
It was great.
Okay, so what was the worst experience in writing the book?
Oh
Which
God!
was the worst place you went to?
Well, I suppose that was, in a sense, was the worst in that. From a personal point of view, to see that kind of complete and utter destruction of any kind of cultural significance, anything that I believed was nothing in there. It was nothing to do with whatsoever. It was something completely and utterly different. I mean that. So I guess that was, in a sense, the most depressing. I was thinking about my terrible hostel in Ibiza with the Italians in the next room I couldn't sleep during the day because they were basically just having sex the entire time.
That's the Italians for you.
But I mean, the most...
no offence if there are any Italians here. Feel free to have sex. We won't look, it's quite dark.
I think that probably the most inspiring was South Africa, just because the way it was completely different to all the other kind of cultures, and also that you could see people using this original do-it-yourself spirit of acid house to actually express themselves creatively, despite the massive problems that the country still had, and they personally had economically, and their position in that. So that for me was, I was thinking that yes, this still does have some value as a kind of a mode of creative expression. So
I mean, I think you mentioned the origins or original film that Resident Advisor made of Black Coffee, and he goes back to his school. And it's amazing. It's really, that actually is really inspiring, because he came from a township and had no money, and he used to. The thing that moved me most was he had so little money. He used to draw a picture of Technics 1200s and imagine that he owned them, because he was so far away from actually owning a set of decks, and yet actually weirdly this week he's just been announced as a new resident in Las Vegas. There's a certain irony in that thing.
Yes, I guess that would have been a useful irony, but
but I found that story actually really inspiring, because what they've used and how they've used sort of cheap electronic equipment to make music is actually kind of what was happening in Chicago in '86 as well.
And what was happening in Britain and Germany in late '80s, and Belgium, Holland, etc. I mean, it was really interesting that the way that they not only they made it, it's all with kind of cracked pirated software, very very old music software like Fruity Loops and this kind of prehistoric stuff. The company probably don't even exist anymore, and the way they distributed it was also interesting, because
didn't they use taxi drivers?
Yes, well, they're kind of minibuses. They're kind of fixed route minibus taxis, and apparently the driver with the best tunes gets the most young passengers. So the drivers are always competing to get something fresh to play. So they're acting in a similar way to a DJ as like the local tastemaker
and very similar to sound systems in Jamaica as well.
Yeah. I should have made that analogy.
Second edition.
And so they're blasting it in these minibus taxis, and they're also distributing it on very low bitrate MP3s via BlackBerry Messenger. Now, for some reason, Blackberries were really popular, really prevalent in those areas of those South African townships at that time. For what reason, who knows? Anyway, so they're sending them via BlackBerry, and some of them just have pin codes as the name of the track. Just incredible. This is what we've got. We want to make music. We want people to hear it, and so we'll use what we have. And this, for me, was you go into this thing, and like I said, when Hannah first asked me to embark on this project, this is quite a kind of large undertaking to wander around the world for a couple of years, and all these things. Travel books are always kind of a quest, aren't they? Thank God Hannah's nodding. And obviously the quest is like, is this still all worth believing in? And you've got aware of the whole EDM thing, and Las Vegas, and the mass over-commercialisation of Ibiza, and gentrification in London, and the destruction of Manhattan nightlife, and you're thinking this travelogue is going to a very, very bad place, and you're just hoping there's something that will affirm what's left of your faith, really. And I think I think there was. I mean, certainly in South Africa, it was seen as and felt like something a really positive part of the culture of the country, and had found its place and had adapted to the local conditions. And this stuff was nothing to do. I mean, it was influenced initially by house music, etc., etc. But what was being made and played there was their music. It wasn't some version of European or American music. This was their own thing. This was for and by them, and it could not have existed anywhere else in the world. So this was when I started thinking, okay, so maybe I'm not going to end up weeping at the end of the road and wish I'd never done this and never embarked on this journey.
I DJ'd with Black Coffee in Ireland 3 years ago, and at that stage I didn't really know that much about him, but we went for dinner together, and we turned up at this club, and there obviously aren't many people from South Africa living in Ireland, but every single woman who was living in Ireland, who was from South Africa, was outside this club waiting for Black Coffee, because he was mobbed by about 30 South African women as we arrived from the club. It was really quite bizarre, and I had to Google his name after that just to find out how huge he was, because they were screaming at him.
Unbelievable. I mean, if you listen to normal daytime radio in South Africa, they're playing deep house on the normal radio, and this. And he is. It's hard to imagine a kind of a DJ. I mean, you do have superstar DJs, but they're not mobbed when they walk down the street, and they're not screamed at by school children. But in South Africa, it's completely different. These the kind of position it's taken on their culture in this in the last 20 years is really unbelievable. This was a fantastic part of it.
So tell me what has changed between writing Altered State and writing Rave On. What's happened to dance music, and what is good and what is terrible?
Well, there's a lot more of it. Well, there's also the internet has happened. Although I remember doing the first edition of Altered State, and there was something about some guy who had a website, and we were worried that people wouldn't know what a website was, so we called it his worldwide website. And this was people communicated via telephone calls, flyers, fanzines. I mean, how did we know about stuff?
Clothes shops,
yeah. Clothes shops, record shops, yeah. That's it. And you generally went to the same place or similar places all the time. So this is something that's completely different. I mean, this is also connected with the second thing that's different, which is there's a lot more history about. At that point, of course, dance music did have its history, but house and techno did not. They had their roots, but they didn't. Their history went back to the first house and techno records. They went back to mid-80s, basically. Now we have more than 30 years of this stuff. That's an incredible amount, and means that it's a kind of community of like minds. It's an extended family. That kind of idea. That's my one model for the kind of club I like. Second model is the enormous, dark, weird, with a kind of place with lots of freakish people doing lots of freakish things. Sometimes this weight of history feels like, I think if I was like 20, I'd feel this as quite a pressure. The pressure of not only the stories of the glory days and how we invented it all, but also the classics going back, and you're still in those same kind of genres, and you're trying to make something new. I find that, and it all, of course, is available at one click. You don't have to order something via import to be posted to you or something like that, or hope that they've got enough copies at the record shop in. It's all there. This culture did kind of grow up simultaneously with mass internet access, though. These two things it is very much the digital culture for the digital music for a digital era. So they have grown up like hand in hand, and I think dance music naturally exploits the possibilities of the internet. And even in Altered State, there were people talking about global networking and how computers would change everything.
Well, and some of I remember reading in The Underground is Massive, where a lot of the early people involved in technology in San Francisco were also people throwing raves and running bulletin boards. Is that right?
Yeah, there was one of the guys who's wrote one of the important HTTP protocols, was also
Alpha Vista, or
I can't remember which one, but he was also involved in that West Coast rave scene. So yeah, the two things have always been electronic music, electronic communication. It's not so much a difficult one. But what has happened now is that essentially all music, to some extent, is electronic music, and these kind of the way that electronic music is put together is the way that pretty much all popular music is approached now. You listen to any kind of pop hit, and you'll hear the stuff that has been either the way of putting it together has come from electronic dance music, or the very sounds themselves are quotations from electronic dance music. So it's become ubiquitous and globalized, but simultaneously it's also kind of still really obscure, because no one knows the name of any records, and the kind of the stars of it, no one knows what they look like. So it's got this weird dual status. Your superstar DJ can go somewhere and no one's going to recognise them. Then you can go in Tesco's and do their shopping, unless they're black coffee.
Yeah.
But that's a very specific thing. But I mean, who's a big superstar DJ? Let's say
the Swedish House Mafia.
The Swedish House Mafia could go shopping in Tesco, and they get their avocados, and they won't get hassled at all. They won't get a discount. Not if I was at the till.
Maybe if they were in Sweden, they would.
They might, maybe.
I mean, they are members of the mafia. They could whack people for a lack of avocado discount.
But you see what I mean? But you've got this dual thing of it being absolutely ubiquitous and mainstream. You'll go in some restaurant, they'll be playing some polite house music in the background, or you go in a coffee shop and they're playing some minimal techno pattering away. But no one knows what these records are called. It's kind of everywhere, but simultaneously kind of below the surface.
Is that the saving grace of dance music, that it's ubiquitous but still semi-underground?
Well, I don't know. What do you think? I've got no theory about this.
Stop asking me. I'm just the idiot with the questions.
Okay. I don't know. Frankly, I've got absolutely no idea. But yeah, well, I mean, the major thing that has happened over the past 30 years is it has become virtually completely globalised and completely unique.
So another question: why do you think it became such a global phenomenon? What do you think the factors were that made it so compelling for so many people?
I guess the obvious one is that it's good. I mean,
fair point.
But it's an experience that people want. Obviously, that's an experience that people certainly.
Do you think the fact that it's often instrumental is kind of meant that there's no impairment for people that don't speak English as a first language.
Yeah, obviously that's a factor as well, and that it doesn't have to be. You know, someone in whatever country you're in, you can start making this music, and you will be. If your music is good enough, you will be accepted within the global community of this culture. It's not that French music is awful. We're not going to listen to any French. It has that kind of transnational acceptance about it. But generally, I just think it's that this is an experience that people want to have, that they find valuable. But obviously it's interpreted in many different ways in many different places, and what amazed me on my travels are how much people argue about all this stuff. I mean, you used to run this bulletin board.
I did, yeah.
And
which was the source of a lot of arguments, endless arguments.
The intensity of the debates going on about it. But I was thinking about it in a different way. It means that people have really kind of invested a lot of belief, commitment, time in all of this, and it's really something that they feel is theirs, something that has a lot of value for them, and something that they want to not only embrace but defend. So this is the fact that 30 years, more than 30 years after the first of the House and Techno records, people are still arguing so intensely about it and believing so deeply in it. I think that's absolutely amazing.
I agree with you, and it's funny because Las Vegas, I think, is a good example of people being kind of slightly outraged at I mean, I've not been to a club in Las Vegas, so I can't really comment, but the idea that the culture has been ripped away from them. And also, in the last couple of days, there's a drum and bass producer called Mr. Bishy who has made a lot of really quite horrible racist remarks, and everyone's turned on him because they felt that drum and bass was, well, it's a fact. It's a racially mixed genre that grew up with black and white kids making underground music. So a lot of people are really outraged that this kid has made a living from something when he holds these views. So I think that does hold true, actually, the idea that people are passionate about this thing that they think that they kind of own. Yeah,
and this I found very heartening. So far down the line, there's still that amount of belief in it all.
So apart from the ability to throw cakes, what makes a great DJ?
What makes a great DJ? This is a
question.
This is a question. Yes, I recognise this. What makes a great DJ? Obviously, that would depend on what you want out of a great DJ, because this whole EDM way of DJing is completely different. It's kind of stop-start. I mean, with the classic kind of house and techno narrative, it's building from somewhere to somewhere else, shifting moves slightly, maybe coming to a bit of a climax, dropping down again, and this kind of hypnosis kind of model of it. But with the EDM DJing, it's basically you get a peak every couple of minutes, possibly more often. It's a perpetual. One of my interviewees called it perpetual orgasm. And
exhausting.
Well, certainly. So, what makes a great DJ? I think there has to be belief in what you're doing, and the selection of the records. I mean, for me, that's pretty much all it is. Those are the important things. the records and the belief in it, and then everything else is on top of that. You're going to ask me who my favourite DJs during this trip, aren't you? I know you are. Good.
Okay. What makes a great club then? What are the ingredients for a really great club?
Well, for me, I've got two favourite kinds. My first kind is the kind of small kind of community. It's not a big venue. The people who run it are probably the DJs. They probably play there every time they have the club on, whether it's every week or every month or whatever. It's a kind of community of like minds. It's an extended family. That kind of idea. That's my one model for the kind of club I like. Second model is the enormous, dark, weird, with a kind of place with lots of freakish people doing lots of freakish things, and bizarre and punishing music, enormous speakers,
You're just describing the Sound Factory, aren't you?
Well, I'd say that in the line of that, there would be the Sound Factory, there would be Berghain, but you're absolutely right. It's that kind of place. So those are my two. So essentially, yeah, my two models are my early experiences of both kinds of those places. But that's just me. It's dependent on the person.
Okay, so we've got some time for people to ask questions, and it's kind of, I can see Frank down there. What?
You said when you went to South Africa, it affirmed your faith, reaffirmed your faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that sort of suggests that you've got this idea of what it is, or what it should be, or what it can be, or what it was for you when it excited you. So, could you tell us what that is?
Well, I think it reaffirmed my faith that it is something that is. Can be an inspiration, can be a legitimate mode for cultural expression that in that kind of do-it-yourself way, rather than it just being a pre-packaged product that's brought in from abroad. And here, this is what house music is. This is what house music clubs are, and here they are, and we're selling them to you. And this was the big question when I was in China, because it was at that stage where everything hasn't been quite settled yet what it's going to be, and there's people coming in from outside offering their kind of ultra or Tomorrowland type of rave festivals as the model. Here, we will bring our model to you, like latter-day cultural imperialists, basically. So is it going to be that, or is it going to be something that's defined by people locally? And the thing about South Africa was that they were using this thing, house culture, technoculture, whatever you want to call it, but they were creating something in their own way that had meaning for them, meaning and purpose for them, rather than just consume. Because you do have Ultra South Africa, which is the big Miami kind of spectacular rave with all the pyrotechnics and all that. They have that, but that came later. It had already been worked out that these people could do something for themselves in their own way, and not be dependent on a product that was shipped in from abroad and predefined in terms of all its parameters.
So it's kind of DIY and togetherness. Are they the tenets of your faith?
You forgot about God.
Are they good enough, Frank? Well, we didn't get into God, did we?
No. Well, he's in the kitchen.
He's in the
the lady there.
A very interesting chat, by the way. I've tried to mould this into one question. Do you have any concerns about the heritage of house and techno? Do you have any concerns for the future about, are people going to forget who Frankie Knuckles was? And when Danny Rampling and Nicky Holloway, etc. retire, do you have any worries about the future? or is it going to turn into an EDM cake fest?
Well, I think what I also noticed that this whole culture has started to get a lot more sense of the importance of where it came from, because it's been going on for so long, and because various people have documented it, and it's now being documented in increasing depth. The history of relatively obscure record labels and nightclubs is being documented in oral histories in quite a lot of depth these days. That I think the history of it will be accessible, but it's a question of if people want what they want to do with that history, and that's not something for people like us to decide. We've had our say, and now it's for whoever comes along afterwards to do whatever they want with that and make of it what they want, because it's their time. But I think there's always going to be these idealists and mavericks and freaks and outsiders who are going to want to create something. And inevitably, change doesn't come from the centre, change comes from the margins. These are going to be the people who are going to change something, whether they do it in a format of electronic dance music as we understand it. Who knows? But they are going to create something of their own. And
I mean, there are people who still think that, I don't know, disclosure. I hate to just come up with that, but they think, I know people my age. I was born in '87. I'm 30. I know people my age that think that Disclosure invented house music, and they DJ and they produce music, some of them. They don't know about Frankie Knuckles or Larry Levan or any of the Detroit techno guys, and I just find that a really interesting area for my generation going forward.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, I mean,
Did Disclosure invent house music?
No, again. Well,
just checking.
That information is available at one click if you want that information. So yeah. I'm not sure.
It's up to my generation or earlier to basically
kill the people that don't know the truth.
To preserve it. That's the word.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. To preserve it. Thank you. Sorry, I know there's lots of other questions. Thank you.
Any more questions? There's a gentleman right at the back there.
Dance music's always been linked with drug culture. Missed the start, so you might have covered this already, but how much of that was evident when you were travelling around? Was drug culture a big thing? Was it bypassed that now? Is it much more than that? Is that still a big key player for different countries where you go around?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, nightlife and drug taking, drinking is always going to be bound up together. I think there's. It would be naive to suggest otherwise. I mean, the workplaces where it's, obviously there were pretty much no drugs, like United Arab Emirates is pretty much drug free. So, but that meant that the whole whole dynamic of a club night was different. Clubs run from 10 till 3. And basically nothing happens until 12 when everyone's pissed. Then you get like 2 or 3 hours of frenzy, and then it's over. And there's no, it doesn't. The law says it has to stop. There's nowhere else to go. It just ends, and that's it. So the culture is different. In places where there's drugs are absolutely banned, and you can get in a very bad trouble.
You mentioned China as well.
Yeah, I mean, China obviously is the source of a lot of, at least the precursors to a lot of the drugs on the market today. I think we have an expert in the audience about drugs.
Where's Mike Power?
Where's Mike Power? Mike, is this correct? Is this correct?
Mike, you're the resident drug dealer. Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah. I was in Shanghai in June, setting up a bogus £25 million ecstasy deal with some Chinese chemists. And yet, China is now responsible for most of the ecstasy production in the world, but not really locally consumed. There's not really that much locally consumed, but that's the main source for the precursors that make ecstasy so cheap and so abundant and so pure today. So yeah, China's full of it.
Yeah, and some does eventually, inevitably, there is kind of some wastage, and some does go into the local market. And they have like occasional crackdowns on what they call the head shaking pills. That's how the law enforcement.
Head and shoulders.
So yeah. I mean, although it is. Although the drug culture is really important to as a kind of popularizer of this music, I think it's compared to 20 years ago, it definitely no longer defines the contours of the culture. I think it's moved significantly beyond, and that is something that has definitely changed. This is no longer an ecstasy-defined culture. It is. It's grown beyond that, and that is something that's changed over the past 20 years.
Yeah. There's a gentleman not quite at the back, but nearly at the back with his hand up.
So I think a lot of us can agree that a lot of electronic music's come in resistance towards authority in many respects. And I find it quite interesting how you've got European countries like Germany who are kind of marking places like Berghain as high culture, and places like the Netherlands who are kind of exporting techno tourism, things like that. And I'm curious about what you think about how that sort of adoption from the powers that be, how that might affect the music as a kind of within the next decades and that kind of thing.
You mean we're kind of being welcomed into the establishment, being seen as a there was talk about this in Berlin. The Berghain was been given the same kind of tax breaks as the opera house, so therefore he's been defined on the same cultural level as the opera house. I mean, it is a big question. Should this kind of culture be seen as? Should it be used as a tourist attraction? Should it be seen on the same level as opera? It does ask all these questions. I mean, I think maybe in London the situation is completely different, and people will be very happy for some support from authorities. And Manhattan being another place similarly. I don't know. Because you're entering completely new territory. But it is Berlin and it is Amsterdam, and Berlin and Amsterdam are not like other cities in Europe. I mean, you talk about some. You couldn't imagine that happening in, say, Stoke-on-Trent, for instance.
Or London. I mean,
or London.
I think London gets £500,000 subsidy for opera and obviously nothing for dance music. I mean, if you see those as both on a cultural level, why do you think that is? Do you think that's a class thing, or?
That is high culture. That is the canon of high culture, and it needs economic preservation, whereas club culture can preserve itself. That's the viewpoint.
No, but I mean, what I'm saying is that justified? Is there such thing as high culture?
It also asks, but it also asks this other question: is that should clubs be preserved forever? Should they? This is a really nightlife is something ephemeral. It's something that burns brightly, briefly. Should it be preserved like the Royal Opera House? I mean, should fabric be preserved for the next 200 years? I don't know. I mean, you're asking these questions. That these are the first time these questions are being asked because, imagine us asking these questions 20 years ago. There'd be no. Are we going to preserve Shelley's laser drone? The first time when this was the selling off of the dance floor of the Hacienda, wasn't it? That was the first time that this was seen as something that might have a preservation value, a kind of, it might be seen as heritage in some way. But I'm like the thing about performing classic tracks with orchestras. I'm kind of slightly wary of this idea of making it artificially a high culture, because it's not. It's his own thing. What it is for itself is good enough. It doesn't need to be those things. It isn't those things, and if it was those things, maybe I wouldn't have even liked it. I don't know. Yeah. But this is an absolutely new question. But I mean, there's no question that Berlin recognised very early that the revenue brought in by the so-called EasyJet set. The weekend ravers flying to Tegel on a Friday, leaving on a Monday after having dropped 300 euros over the weekend. That this was a massive boost to the local economy, and so they're seeing it absolutely differently to the way it's seen here, whereas these people are seen as a public nuisance essentially. But yeah, I mean, we're starting to get into this territory where these new questions. I mean, gentrification wasn't a question 20 years ago when I was doing Altered State. There was loads of empty places that nobody wanted in city centres. This is a kind of a new question of our contemporary era.
Right, there's a lady just there who wants to ask a question.
Nadine.
Hello. Was there ever a moment, Matthew, when you just thought, I'm too old for this shit, I want to go home?
Yes. I'll tell you when it was. It was the third morning of the Psytrance Festival by the Sea of Galilee, and it was where my tent was. Meant I could hear Psytrance non-stop. So I've been hearing Psytrance non-stop for the past 3 days and nights. Awake, asleep, I've been hearing Psytrance, and I just felt that I'd given all I could to this project, and I just wanted to cry and go home. But then I realised that the people who were giving me a lift there said they were staying for 5 days. But if I wanted, I could hitchhike back to Tel Aviv on my own. I realised then that I had to hitchhike all the way back to Tel Aviv, which is basically the other side of Israel. And then I really did feel this was way too wide. Why did I ever agree to doing this? So yes, yeah.
Did you hitchhike?
Yeah.
No, you didn't.
Yeah.
Good at it.
Yes, I made it in the end.
Lady there.
Me?
Yes.
I was wondering if you think that music cultures as a defining sort of experience or feeling or way to sort of belong to something still exists with younger generations.
That's not really for me to answer, though, is it?
But you were sort of trying to understand what is the current situation of rave culture. And
Yes, I mean...
we have a combined age of 170, so you have to put it in context.
Yeah, I mean, but definitely not in the same way, because of difference in access to music there's an unbelievable gulf in experience from someone who's 20 now from someone who was 20, 30 years ago. So I think that there's definitely younger people have much more eclectic taste than we would have been much more partisan. I mean, I don't think I even listened to any rock music for nearly 10 years. You know, I was against it.
Rightly so.
But you know, not even old good stuff.
Absolutely.
But I think people are still as passionate about music, but they're not passionate in the same way that we were, because our thinking was defined by the culture that we grew up in, and the situation in which that you had to commit to something, because you had to dedicate so much of your time and resources to actually getting it.
I think we were maybe more guided by magazines and things like that, because you couldn't hear a lot of the music that people wrote about, so you sometimes had to just go and buy it or order it on mail order before having heard it.
You have to imagine it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You imagine what it sounded like from a review, and I think it is true from my experience as a DJ that people younger people are more open-minded. But they can listen to a rock record next to a house record and a techno record, and it's all fine for them. Whereas I think our generation was very much like, it's like a football team. That that's my team.
Yeah, that's my thing.
I'm supporting that team. I'm not changing my team. That's my team.
Yeah.
And I think younger people don't feel about music that way anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing, and in some ways it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously has both elements of that.
Yeah.
Dave.
We still Dave.
Isn't it true though that through all the time, certainly since the 80s, that the culture that you saw in Las Vegas was already there in the mid-80s? It was in Ibiza. They had super clubs then, where when I first went to Pasha, I was amazed to see all these people who were paying to sit at these tables next to the dance floor. So it was there, but we were so conscious of the little clubs that existed in London and the occasional large event in London before raves, that it took us another 10, 15 years before those kind of clubs came to the UK, the super clubs. But in a sense it's been there all along, and we've been influenced by it, but it wasn't our history, as it were, at the time anyway.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's true, and there's always been celebrities in Ibiza before, Paris Hilton and whoever else. There was Freddie Mercury, Grace Jones, Maradona, on the dance floor. But I think the way this was, the Ibiza thing did have that kind of jet set glamour thing going on, but it also did have, up to a point, the pretense to be somehow connected to the hippie era and to be somehow about peace and love and benevolence, goodwill to all men and all that kind of thing. Whereas, the stuff you have now has no pretense to have anything to do with any kind of hippie values, progressive values, or anything else. It's hedonism and it's money and it's show, and that's all it is. And it doesn't pretend to be anything else. Because those Ibiza clubs did evolve out of that kind of post-hippie era. I mean, you wrote a book about Pasha, so you did the Pasha oral history, so you know better than I do. But there was it did have roots in that. But the things that are happening now have no connection with that at all. It is really it's entertainment industry, and That's all it is.
And if I could just cheat and ask one more question. In South Africa, is your perception that it's really, what I've heard was mostly soulful house, but you're saying it's very much deep house, and it's coming from very much a South African perspective, a South African traditions. It's not necessarily township jazz or anything, but is that what it is now? Is it soulful house, or is it all kinds of different?
Well, the kind of the soulful deep house thing is the kind of mass market. You know what people would, I mean, consider here kind of quality soulful house is South Africa's pop music. So that's the way in which it differs. But then you've got all these other styles coming out of different cities and different areas of the country as well at the same time.
We've got time for one more question. If there's anybody that wants to ask one, don't be shy. The gentleman just there.
Coming back to the point earlier about kind of the interface between, I guess, politics and dance music, is there and kind of having read the book as well, kind of is there an extent to which the kind of old vision of dance music is this kind of progressive thing depended on an equal and opposite kind of repression, and is it that acceptance into mainstream culture that's kind of robbed it in places like Las Vegas of its kind of original intention?
That's interesting, and I don't think there was ever a total acceptance that this was a counterculture in any way. This I don't think some people saw it that way, but other people just saw it as a good thing to do on Saturday night. Get off your head and dance some great tunes, and nothing more than that, and didn't feel the need to have it mean anything more than that. The point at which it became seen as some kind of counterculture was the point at which there was a pushback against it, and therefore some people defined it as a kind of counterculture. I guess it was an alternative culture in the early years in the States, but like Dave said, there was always this kind of commercial business point of view that this was an entertainment business, and that's just been taken to its logical conclusion in the kind of things that we see in Las Vegas or in many other places, but definitely to its biggest extreme in Las Vegas, because that's the biggest kind of money-making machine that there is. So I don't think that's a great answer to that question. It seems to be the only one.
What a terrible way to end it off. I'm so disappointed.
Shall I whistle?
It's going really well till then. You can have another crack at it if you want.
I think we're just going to...
Oh, fuck it. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, and I'm amazed at how many people have turned up. It's obviously nothing to do with me, but please go and buy Matthew's book, Rave, on Matthew Collin.